right. Well, it's an honor and a blessing to be here with everyone. As you can see, I don't do too well standing behind those things. It's been a long time that we've been working on these issues now. And for those of you who have seen me speak before, you know I always give honor to my mother and my grandmother, who are the rocks that I stand on. Let me ask by a show of hands, how many folks in the room, raise your right hand if you love your mother or your grandmother. They may be here, so you better raise your hand. Everybody look around. Keep those hands up high. All right, I see one person who does not love their mother or their grandmother. I'm going to need everybody to run over there real quick and give them a hug, because we're going to get this right tonight. I'm incredibly blessed. My mother and my grandmother gave me so many amazing, amazing lessons over the years that have helped me in my environmental justice and civil rights and revitalizing communities journal. And one of the things that my mom shared with me, she said, son, you're going to have some tough days. By a show of hands, has anybody in the room ever had a tough day? Let me see. Just raise your hand. All right. Look like everybody understand about those tough days. Now, I should share with you all that on one side of my family is Baptist and Pentecostal ministers, deacons and deaconesses. So you know what time that is, right? And we're going to be here a while. And it's interesting that my mother was right, but she said, you're going to have to find a way to deal with those tough days. And since everybody in this room has had some tough days before, every day since I've been 16 years old, I get up and I look in the mirror and I say I'm blessed and highly favored. Now, I know I might be in a room tonight with some folks who might not understand the power that exists, but we're going to try it. So I want everybody who feels comfortable to say I'm blessed, and highly favored. This side of the room is feeling it. I'm going to come back over here. I'm blessed, and highly favored. And one last time, I'm blessed. And highly favored. And we truly are. I was blessed that people hear me talk about my mother and my grandmother, but my grandfather and my dad were amazing in their own right. One, they were amazing because they married the right people, but they were also amazing. My grandfather was a coal miner and a small farmer. And my grandfather was one of those folks whom had this certain special thing about him that people would come from counties around and they would sit on his porch. And my grandfather also worked on civil rights. He worked on workers' rights, and he worked on voters' rights. So that meant that people had to strategize. Now, I want you see what the person who's standing in front of you, my grandfather didn't look that much different. So being a man of color who worked in coal mines. Now, you might not understand, back then when you worked in coal mines, the coal mines owned the company store, they owned the doctors, they had all the power. So if you were someone who was willing to stand up in a respectful way and try and make real change happen, then you could be putting yourself in a dangerous situation. My grandfather taught me as a young boy about being courageous. Now, I want you all to take just a quick second with yourself, and I'm going to ask you a question. By a show of hands, how many folks in the room have ever been courageous, whether small or big? Raise your hand, that's okay. How many folks in the room have had a moment when you wish you were courageous? Okay, a few more folks. And how many folks in the room would be courageous if you had the tools and if you had the right people surrounding you? Raise your hand. So almost every person in this room has risen their hand about courage, about being courageous. I want to bring that into our conversation tonight because when you talk about environmental justice or climate justice or working for voters' rights, then there's a level of courageousness that has to happen in that space. And if you're not doing that, then you're missing an opportunity. When I was really young, I had a great teacher and a family that, for whatever reason, said, I want you to actually memorize the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And as I do this work, I'm reminded of some words. We find these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, and endowed with certain unalienable rights. So when you see the pictures that are moving behind me, I want you to remember those words that our country is founded on and how we should be being courageous in our actions to make sure that that becomes reality. Now, they told me that I had about 15 minutes to speak, and I know I've probably used up about 6 of those so far, so I'm going to take us on a little journey. You know, I'm going to ask you to do something here with me. I want everybody in the room to take a deep breath and hold it. Now let it out. I don't want nobody passing out here. I saw somebody, it's like, he better hurry up and say something. It's interesting, it's an autonomic response. It is something that we do naturally. We do it over 20,000 times a day. Some people are breathing in clean, pristine air. Others are breathing in dirty, toxic air. We have, based upon what Harvard shared, not what Mustafa shared, in a study a couple of years ago, 350,000 people are dying prematurely from the fossil fuels that they continue to breathe in. We have more people right now who are dying from air pollution than are dying from gun violence. How many times have you turned on the TV and seen the unfortunate that we've lost another child? We've lost another elder. More people are dying from air pollution than are dying from car crashes. More people are dying from air pollution than are dying from the overdoses of drugs. Think about that. Courageous actions are necessary to make sure that this no longer becomes the reality that folks have to deal with. In places like the 48217, you saw that picture there in Michigan. So I grew up in 2 places, in Appalachia and West Virginia. Let me call it out so don't no mountaineers jump on me when I go back. Oh, well, I need to come on back here, but they won't let me come that far because of the camera. and then a little bit in Michigan. So the 48217 is important to me because the kids who look out those windows, instead of seeing trees and green space, like when we look out these windows, they see the flaring that's happening in companies. And that's why the work that Mary Ann and folks at the EPA are doing is so incredibly important to make sure that those children have a brighter future. We also know that we have places like Cancer Alley that you all have heard about. And it all came back to what Mary Ann shared with us, that long journey toward justice. Right there in Warren County, North Carolina, let me call out Miss Dolly Burrell and the rest of the folks over there who began in those pictures that you saw. And the reason I made sure that you saw all those images of those individuals, both black and white, those who are lower wealth and those who are working, who are willing to stand up and push. That was a transformational moment. Mary Ann talked about this being a transformational moment, and she is correct, because it all started from those individuals in that space. Let me ask you all, by a show of hands, how many folks in the room have had a drink of water in the last 24 hours? Everybody, oh, wait a minute. Oh, hang on, let me start over. How many folks in the room have had a libation in the last 24 hours? Okay, now everybody's hand went up. You in the front couldn't see what was going on there in the back. But we know we've got some challenging situations, and that's why courageous actions and conscientious conversations are so incredibly important. When now almost every person in this room, if you didn't know it, you probably have PFAS in your blood right now, elements of PFAS. And folks in North Carolina understand what's going on in that space. When we have 1.1 million folks in our country who have been lead poisoned, and when you see things that are going on in Flint, Michigan, but also in Jackson, Mississippi, and a number of other locations across our country, then we begin to have the understanding of how our crumbling infrastructure plays a role, but also our climate crisis. When we see folks, unfortunately, walking in human waste in places across our country, both in Appalachia and throughout the Black Belt and in the mountains in many, many states across the country, then we understand the work that we still have to do. When we know that here in the great state of North Carolina, that we've got 80,000 people who live within 2 miles. 2 miles of what, Sherry? Of hog farms. And we know that there's 10 billion gallons of waste that folks are dealing with. And who are those folks? They're people of color, and they're lower wealth white communities. Our brothers and sisters that we have a responsibility to do what? Courageous actions. Y'all say it with me, because sometimes people get a little nervous in our country of courage. So I'm going to make sure that we at least get it on your tongue so you feel all right tomorrow when you have to go and have some conversation. So everybody say courageous, actions. Courageous, actions. And since I believe in the power of the Trinity, let's try it again. Courageous, actions. All of these folks that you are seeing, the national parks that are now dealing with significant air pollution, that are dealing with the climate crisis, requires courageous action. You just saw the Manchester community in Houston, Texas, that came through. Most folks been to Houston, but most folks ain't been to the Ship Channel. Hardworking Latinx community, and when you go there, you feel like you're rolling down the windows of your car and breathing in gasoline fumes. That's why we need the EPA, but we also need the state government there in Texas to do the right things. It requires courageous actions. It requires courageous actions also to make sure that those billions of dollars that Marianne shared with us actually make it to the spaces and places that need them the most. It requires making sure that the states are doing the things that they actually should be doing, and sometimes we have to push them to make sure that that happens. Because if we don't, those resources will once again go to those who have the capacity to utilize and to access them. But we know that underneath of this administration, they've been very conscious of making sure of helping folks to build the capacity to be able to access those dollars, to make sure that there's an all of federal government approach. And we hope that we can also get that on our state level to make real change happen. Because we got 2.4 million miles of fossil fuel pipeline. Mustafa, how much is that? That's enough to go to the moon and back, to the moon and back, and to the moon again. So I believe that we need to have courageous actions in saying that we no longer need any more fossil fuel pipeline, because we understand that that fossil fuel that is being burned in black and brown and lower wealth white communities and indigenous lands is also the same pollution that's making folks sick and also driving our climate crisis. But we have to be courageous in this moment to make sure that that happens. We are courageous by making sure that we are honoring democracy. It's interesting. James Baldwin once said that I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. On Monday, you're talking about democracy. On Tuesday, you're slipping in a new bill on gerrymandering. Can I get a witness? On Monday, you say you care about children, but then on the next day, you're passing a bill that's putting more pollution into their lungs. So we have to have courageous action. That courageous action will also help us to make sure that some of these pictures you see here about this new clean economy, that it will not be like the fossil fuel economy where some folks were left behind, but that everyone has the opportunity to be able to take advantage of this new set of resources and transformational actions in this moment. I said I would be brief, and my mama gonna watch this tape, so I'm gonna make sure that I actually do it. I want y'all to do me a favor, because I want to make sure that there's enough time for folks to actually socialize afterwards. I want you to look to the person to your left. If your neighbor don't know their left, help them out. Look to your neighbor to your right. All right. Everybody do me a favor. Reach your hand out to the person on the left-hand side of, there you go. And reach your other hand out to the person on your right-hand side. It's okay. Everybody used hand sanitizer. You're all right. There you go. Now, I want everybody to actually do what you can to stand up if you have the ability to. If you don't, that's okay. Dr. King shared with us a long time ago that we come to these shores in different ships, but we all in the same boat now. I want you to think about that in relationship to so many things that are going on. In relationship to voter suppression, we're all in the same boat if we truly want our democracy to thrive. We're in the same boat in relationship to the climate crisis that we're dealing with. Go down and ask folks in Princeville, North Carolina, when those floods that came through. Or go on over there to Hamlet, North Carolina, and talk to the folks who are dealing with the wood pellets and a number of other things that they're dealing with. And I can stand here all day and talk about the various impacts that are happening in North Carolina, and South Carolina, Georgia, and Mississippi, and West Virginia, and Tennessee, and Kentucky. But in our country right now, people are trying to separate us. They understand that if we can put wedges between folks, then we can continue to move on down the road and to continue to place profit over people and a number of these dynamics that are going on. But I want you to look around this room tonight, and what you see is black folks and white folks. You see Asian, Pacific Islander, and indigenous, and Latinx or Latine communities, all everyone coming together. That's power. Let me ask you a question. And anybody in the room, when you was in elementary school, did anybody teach you about power? Did you have a class on power? Yeah, I didn't think you did. But maybe that's a bit too young, Mustafa. You're asking the wrong question. In middle school, was anybody in this room taught about power? Did you have a power class, Power 101? Nobody did. Okay, how about high school? Because, you know, people playing some games right now in high school, they're taking some books away. Maybe there's still a book on Power 101. No one? College. So we got a couple folks who made it to college and they learned a little bit about power. I wonder why people don't teach us about power. What is it that's scary about power? Someone said they don't want you to have it. But I want you once again to look around this room. You see, whenever we start to come together, when we embrace our humanity, if you will. I'll ask you one last question before I close here. How many folks have ever gotten on an elevator and you look at those numbers up there and you say, Lord, please don't let anybody say anything to me while I'm on this elevator? We separate ourselves from each other. But as you see here tonight, this is what real power looks like. This is the power of us coming together. I remember when the Women's March was about to happen, and there was a whole lot of men, I ain't saying there was any in this room, who said 1 million women would never come together. And sisters said, oh yeah? And more than 1 million women came together, but it wasn't just about marching. It was about going back home and saying that if I can't find somebody who represents what I'm looking for, I'll run for office myself. And now you see amazing women in local governments and the counties and states and all across the federal family. That's power. I remember, for those of us who are rooted in science, the Science March. And people said that scientists would never come out their labs, but they did. And not only did they come out, but they marched. Now, I was there. Let me tell y'all a quick secret. They ain't have a whole lot of rhythm. But they showed up. And they realized that they have a responsibility in this moment, not only to make sure that there's real science. Y'all remember the last administration who said science is not important? But we're not going to dwell on the past. We're going to be in this moment. And that's why the work that's happening at the Environmental Protection Agency, the work that's happening at CDC and HHS and a number of other places is so incredibly important. But those scientists also said, you know what? For those frontline communities who haven't had the capacity, one, we will honor the traditional environmental knowledge and community-based science, but we will also make sure that we are partnering effectively. That's power. You've seen also all these amazing young people across our planet who have said the climate crisis is an issue that we have to fix. And now there's an intergenerational movement, but so many young people are utilizing their power to push the Biden administration and folks on the international level to do more. And that's why we have to be hand in hand with all those amazing young people. So I'm going to find out here as I close in the next 30 seconds if I'm in the right place. So I'm going to ask y'all to do something. So I want everyone who believes that they have power, when I count to 3, to say power. So we'll find out. I have a feeling this side of the room is going to be stronger than this side, but I'm not trying to be biased. So 1, 2, 3. Power! Well, y'all better than those folks over at Harvard. Let's try it again. Everyone say power. Power. So this time I want y'all to throw your right hand in the air like it's 1968 at the Olympics. I know some of y'all were there watching. And this time we're going to say power to the people. Well, that was just pathetic. Let's try it again. Power to the people. Power to the people. Say power to the people. Power to the people. One last time, say power to the people. Power to the people. Now we have to use that power to make sure that we have courageous actions to address the issues that are happening to our democracy, to make sure that we address the issues that are happening in relationship to the climate crisis, and to make sure that not one vulnerable community exists in our country anymore because we make the proper investments in the enforcement actions to make real change happen. I'm Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali. Thank you all for a couple of minutes of your time.